Hello, my name is Rick Houston, and welcome to the Scene Vault Podcast, your source for all things NASCAR history. Presented by Las Vegas Motor Speedway, America's racing showplace.
He was an apprentice carpenter, building engine crates. And every time John Holman passed him, he'd beg John Holman for put him in a race car.
And you know how Dad was. He goes, well, Dan, how are we running? He said, Harry, he's driving it like he ain't got money to go home. Dale was in the bar, and he says, Dale, Junior's out here peeing in the pool. And Dale said, well, probably every kid out there is doing that. And Cale said, yeah, but they ain't doing it from the high dive.
He came back and finished second, and years later when I worked for him, I said, Cale, how hard was it to drive that car? He said, boy, I had to turn that car with both arms and both legs.
The day NASCAR and all of us associated in any way with NASCAR forget its past, that's the day we don't have any future.
All right, so first of all, if everybody would just go around the table and introduce yourselves and basically tell your relationship with Cale, when you worked with him, in what capacity and so forth. So, Waddell?
Well, I worked with Cale as a crew chief.
I did not know, but you worked with him both with Ranier and then later at his team.
Right.
Okay. All right.
We had two relationships. It was what a lot of fun was working with them.
All right. And your name is Waddell Wilson.
Waddell Wilson.
All right.
I'm Jamie Bishop. I worked with Cale from 1992 until they closed the doors at Cale Yarborough Motorsports. I was a weekend guy, but there was only like 19 of us working there, so everybody had to do their part.
All right.
I'm John Dodson, and I worked with Cale when he was at MC Anderson's in 82, 81, 82, 83, 82. Then 83, he went over to Ranier, and then I worked with Waddell and Lorin there for a little while.
All right.
I'm Lorin Ranier. I didn't really work with Cale other than my dad owned the team, and I was just kind of a teenager hanging around and trying not to get in Waddell's way. That's really what I was doing. That was important.
Waddell, how well did he do on that? Stay out your way.
He had a lot of questions.
Yeah, a lot of questions.
But he was a good kid. I can't say nothing but good about him.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, we're here to tell some Cale Yarborough stories. We lost him a couple of days ago. And my goal is for you guys to handle this. I want you guys to tell stories about Cale, what made him who he was, and what made him so successful on the racetrack. So you guys take it away. Tell whatever stories you want to tell about Cale.
Well, I probably know much or more than anyone about him. As I can remember when I was working for Holman and Moody, and he was in the building. He was an apprentice carpenter, building engine crates. And every time John Holman passed him, he'd beg John Holman for put him in a race car. So finally, Ford Motor Company decided they'd take him to Asheville Weevil Speedway, him and Benny Parsons, and try him out. And when it was all over, Cale got the job. And the first ride he got in was with Banjo Matthews. And I remember being at Daytona in the July race, and I mean, he took that Ford to the front, and it blew up. But you know, you knew when he got on the scene, he was something to be reckoned with.
So you knew him well before he got established.
Oh, we became friends. You know, on the weekends, if we ever got off on a weekend, we'd water ski. He lived down on Lake Wiley, and my family and I'd go down and meet with him and spend the afternoon with him on Sunday.
How badly did he want to be in that race car? You said that every time John Holman came by.
He was begging to get it. I never seen anybody desire like him to want to drive a race car. And then he proved it once he got there.
Awesome.
I always thought he's a little. I got a cousin like Cale, similar to the way Cale is, but to me, I never heard him say a thing about any other team, anybody. He never complained. When I was around him, he was laser focused, like he had blinders on. He just did his job, and he really couldn't tell you that much about the car that I remember, except, well, I guess I'll pull my gloves up a little bit tighter. You know, we ain't quite there, but he'll do it. And I remember at Talladega. No, it wasn't Talladega. It was a different track, but he made that comment. He said, "I'll pull my gloves up a little tighter. We'll be ready for him," and that was the way he was.
Well, I tell you what, I worked with a lot of drivers and around them, worked with them as crew chief, build engines, and he ranked to the top.
Yes.
There was nobody like him. I mean, he was the easiest man on earth to work with. He'd come to me at times, he said, "Now, Waddell, don't give it to me if you don't want me to use it. And don't do anything that'll slow it down."
Yeah.
And that was his motto. That's the way he was.
Yeah.
And the sad thing about it, in '82, at Talladega, no, it was '81, he come to me and asked me about driving a race car. I thought he was joking with me. So, I just shut it off and didn't think about it. The very next year, the same race at Talladega, he said, "Damn it, what the hell, I want to drive that race car." And I said, "You kidding?" I said, "But if you want to drive a race car, I guarantee you Harry Ranier will hire you."
Yep.
Then Harry come to the racetrack, and he said, I told Harry, I said, "I heard you're driving." He looked at me like, "You what?"
I actually have a funny story on note to that. So you must have give him our home phone number.
Yeah.
Seriously, you must, because I was about 17 maybe at the time, and I'm at home, and this was 1982, and the phone rings, and I pick it up, and it's in the afternoon, like after school. I pick the phone up, and hello. He said, "Hey, it's Cale Yarborough. Is your dad there?" I'm like, "No." He said, I'd like to talk to him about driving his race car." So you must have given him the number. I said, "Cale, I'll make sure that he calls you tonight."
That was the oddest thing, somebody his caliber to come and want to drive your race car.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I was shocked with it the first time, and then the next year, he came by and,
Yep.
but I'll never forget your dad, he was happy about it as I was.
Absolutely.
He did the same thing when he was at juniors, leaving juniors. He did the same thing to David Ift and MC. He kept telling David, he said, "I tell MC I'll drive that car. I'll drive that car." So when we got him, and you're talking about '81 at Talladega, and '82 at Talladega, that's the last year with MC.
That was.
And that's when he come in '83. But in '82 at Talladega, we were there, and I've told this story before about our spoiler was slotted on the back. And we made big washers on the spoiler. We qualified 4th, and we were going through inspection, and went through inspection. They measured the spoiler, so we was pushing to the gas pumps, and all of us, me and Ed and Barry, had 1/4-inch drive ratchets, and we undone the spoiler and slid that thing up an inch and tightened it back.
Cheaters.
And Dale Inman told on us. He told on us. And we pretty sure it was Dale Inman. So anyway, they called us and said, run get a drill, fill that thing up with pop rivets, since Gasaway standing there. So we put pop rivets all over the back. He said, "Don't ever try to do that again." So we said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, I'll put you all out of racing." Mm-hmm. So we went on to the gas pumps and put it on the line. Well, they never measured it back, so we still had it up an inch when we put all the rivets in there. And my daddy told Cale, my daddy bet some guy $2,000 that Cale would lead the first lap. And he told Cale, and Cale said, "I'll get it for you." Cale led the first lap. And then when he got out of that car, we started 4th and finished 4th. He got out of that car, my daddy was standing there. He went over to my daddy, Johnny Dodson. He said, "Give me my half. I get 1,000 of that." And that sounds like Cale, don't it?
That's Cale.
Yeah,
He said, "Where's my half at?" True story.
All right, so all of you raced with Cale. What was it like racing against Cale?
You did that the most.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's the Lorenzen with him. Well, I don't think he come at that long, but anyway, there's Pearson and Allison, and you always worried about him. Cale was always one of those threats. There was a few cars you worried about, and that was one of them.
Well, 3 years in a row, you didn't race against him. You raced against everybody else. He was out there, won 3 championships in a row.
Yeah.
So there's 3 years you didn't race against him.
I know when he come drive our race car, in 70 or 82, with Benny Parson was the first one to break 200 mile an hour at Talladega. And then going to Daytona, that winter was in the wind tunnel, and we naturally wanted to be the first one at Daytona to break 200. And so they figured the calculation on the drag we had in the wind tunnel and then the horsepower I had. They said that car will run 203 mile an hour.
I remember standing and working on that car.
And anyway, so we get to Daytona, and 45 flat was 200 mile an hour, on the stopwatch. And Cale's out there running 45, 70 a day, and I'm thinking, what is wrong with that race car? Is that all it's going to do? And I'd always been used to, up the previous drivers like Baker and, and them. I mean, the first, second lap, you knew exactly what you had. But Cale was out there sandbagging. I didn't know he was going to do that to me. And in passing the day before we qualified, he said, Waddell, quit worrying about that car. It's okay. Don't touch it. He said, I ain't never been in nothing this fast. He said, this thing got enough horsepower when it's going down the back stretch. He said, when it hits them bumps, it spins the tires.
Golly.
And he said, you go into turn 3, and it's like you holding a needle and me trying to thread it. So we get ready to qualify, and go out there, and the spoiler, you can put it anywhere you wanted at that time. There wasn't no rule on it. And then, plus that Chevrolet was a notchback, so it had a lift anyway. So I had it down at 20 degrees. He pushed it down even more and gets in it. So the first lap, he run 44.70 something. The guy gave me a tape on it, and I lost it. But anyway, the second lap, and they was timing it interval around the racetrack from the tower. And that guy said, you guys think that's something? He's on the clip right now going down the backstretch at 203. And then he went in the turn, and she flew with him. Dick Beatty picked me up on pit road. We went up there to the car. The car was back on its wheels. And went in the infield care center, and they had him in there. And he looked up at me, and he like a whip pup, and he said, well, you done everything right, but one thing, I'm like, what was that? He said, you didn't put the controls in it so I could fly it.
I know he asked the guard, the record driver. First thing he asked him was, how fast was my first lap?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, did I go 200?
But anyway, over 200. And then if he'd have made it back around at that lap at 203, he'd have been on the pole by 5 mile an hour because the pole car was only 198 mile an hour.
Yeah.
But come in the garage there.
Well, one other thing. There was a funny side note to that. I guess Junior Johnson come over and looked at the car. He looked at the car.
Oh, yeah. I don't know what you're going to tell.
Yeah. He looked at it, and you know how Junior was, and Junior said, well, anything that fast or to turn over. That's what he said.
Yeah. But I come back in the infield, back in the garage area, and Bill France got to me, and he said, what if you'll fix that race car? You can work on it 24 hours a day. I'll send a guard here with you guys. And then you have to start the 125 on Thursday. And you can run a couple laps, come back in, work on it. And then Harry Ranier come to me and said, my jet's out here. And K-Met Farms was there. Their jet was there. And Chevrolet called and won. If anything we needed, they'd have it down there. But, Cale had me hire 3 of his guys from M3 Anderson. And they come to me and said, we ain't going to work on that race car. We're going to be at Happy Hour in an hour or two.
And that was Barry and Ed and Pete.
Yeah, and that was one of the biggest mistakes I ever make, not fixing that race car. And it bugs me today. That's one of those 2 of them that bugs me, and that's one of them. But anyway, the Leonard Wood was the best one. He come to me, and he said, Waddell, and there was tears coming out of his eyes. You're not going to fix that race car. He said, you've been on the pole 4 years in a row with different drivers and different cars, and you're not going to fix that race car. But like Junior said, when anything goes that fast, it ought to turn over.
Yeah, exactly.
But you pulled a backup out and won the Daytona 500.
Yeah, that was. We run the Pontiac Le Mans in the 500, and we only qualified it on Monday at 195, but we was no effort put into it.
Right.
But we still had to record at Daytona for the fastest 500 miles recorded at that time.
Now, I have a question I want to ask. If you just said that if you had made it back around, if Cale had made it back around, that you would have won that pole by 5 miles an hour. How bad would that car have been torn down after qualifying? Or do you even want to think about that?
Well, let me tell you something. You didn't work with John Holman like I did. I worked for John Holman for 10 years, and he'd come to me and he'd put that big finger in my chest and he said, Waddell, let me tell you something. If you get caught cheating, I'll fire you. He didn't do that once. He done it several times. Well, I certainly knew, knowing that man, that he would fire me if I got caught cheating. Well, I'm not going to get caught cheating because I need a job. And furthermore, I didn't want to cheat anyway because I didn't want to have to look over my shoulder and worry about that. So, you know, the car was as legal as it could be. You won't believe all the times we got inspected. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, Dick Beatty in 1980 was getting ready for the Daytona 500, which Buddy Baker was driving a race car, and he that morning he paid me to the garage area, and went in the office and he used to run everybody out and he said, "Sit down over there." He said, "I want to tell you something. Ain't nobody wants to run against that car today." I said, "Dick, we're not doing anything wrong." He said, "Yeah, I know." He said, "I wish people would come and go through inspection when you see how legal the car really is." But no, you know, there was so many things you could do to a race car at that time. You know, you had rolling resistance, you had aerodynamics, you had horsepower, and all three of them contributed to the car going fast. And you worked on all three of them, and you didn't leave nothing unturned.
You talked about racing against Cale. I always thought you had to race against Waddell's engines. And that's the truth. I mean, that's how good his engines were, you know. We talk about 82, Daytona 82, then Cale wins it in 83 for you. In 82, I was at MC's. That's when Bobby's bumper came off, and he won the 500, and we ran second in MC Anderson Valvoline car. Cale radioed in, wasn't a quarter into the race. Caution come out, and he said, "You know, everything's fine, but I can't get Bobby off me. It's like he's trying to back into me on a caution lap. He's trying to knock his bumper off."
That's right.
Because they tested with that bumper off, and they won the Daytona 500 with that bumper off.
No, let me tell you about that bumper deal.
But even that was, Cale told us, before it ever happened, Cale said, "Bobby's all over me. He's like he's trying to run into me," because they was on caution. He was behind him. He said he's slamming the brakes on like I'm going to hit him, and ended up beating us, and we ran second in the 500.
What else getting ready to tell you where this
Yeah, let
came
me
from?
tell you, the year before, Bobby was driving our car at Talladega.
Yep.
And we got in a wreck, and well, it didn't wipe us out or nothing, but it knocked the bumper off of the car. And then we ended up winning the race. He remembered that. So they had that bumper stuck on there, pop everything.
Yeah, that's it. Because they knocked it off a little ways and then ripped it off when they come on pit road. They took it the rest of the way off on pit road.
Yeah, and that was a metal bumper. That was dangerous.
Took my Daytona 500 ring right there.
There's a story true that the backup car you used at Daytona after the flip was a show car?
Well, we had used it. That's what we was using it as a show car at that time. Yeah, we wasn't going to race it no more until that happened, and that was the only car we had left. So, you know.
But it had been tested the month before, and it was every bit. It was the car that Benny went 200 in, right?
Yeah.
It was that car from the year before. So there's a big, long story about that the car was at a Hardee's at New Smyrna or wherever. Waddell can tell you right now, that car was at the shop, and Greg and Roger Legion
Yeah, Roger Legion.
brought it down to Daytona.
In a pickup truck.
In a flat trailer.
So it was a show car, but
Well, it was a full-fledged race car. We were just going to use it as a show car.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't that's like a fishing story. That thing keeps getting bigger and bigger. And bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Cale
when we
was
went to
just-
Atlanta in '83, that was another race car we had because we were short on cars. We
Yeah.
wrecked at Rockingham, wrecked at Daytona, and that car we won Atlanta with it was being used as a show car. I thought.
It was actually going to be used as a show car. I actually talked to Mark Bush about that, who was a show car manager.
Yeah.
And it was in the rotation to become a show car,
Yeah.
and they took it out of the rotation.
There you go.
Fixed it, put all the right stuff back on it, and then
Running low on cars that year.
Yeah, you remember back in February when I was down there testing, AJ,
Yeah.
come and drove that car.
That's right.
And then your dad and AJ come to me and wanted to know if I couldn't run the 2 cars at Daytona. I said, I don't have the parts and pieces and the manpower to
people.
do it.
Yeah. So AJ Foyt tested that Pontiac at Daytona because Cale wanted to feel remember he wanted to feel that Monte Carlo in the draft.
Right.
So I remember that there's pictures of those 2 cars running
Yeah, I've
nose
seen
to
it.
tail, out there. I remember that well. And remember Cale actually drove, when we tested, Cale drove the Pontiac first.
Right.
And then you put him in the Monte Carlo, and he said, well, I think the Monte Carlo's going to be faster.
Oh, that thing was a rocket
Yeah.
ship.
Yeah, he liked it.
Yeah, right.
He had a choice.
Right. And then he said, I want to feel the Monte Carlo in the draft. And so then that's when you had AJ.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember him going out there and, that was back in the era when you had to track by yourself. It was a private test.
Now, was the car actually on display at a Hardee's?
No, the car was at the shop.
No.
The car was at the shop.
Waddell can tell you that. It was at the
Had
shop.
it ever been used as a...
You'd taken
It
some
was going to be
pictures.
used as a show car if Hardee's needed it for a show car.
Right. But
That's
it had taken some pictures because there's actually a picture. I don't know if it's that car or the road course car that you used it.
It had got set aside.
It got because we
It's
were
gonna
running
be a show
because
car
we were
now.
running Chevrolets.
So it was classified as a show car. It just hadn't been to any shows.
That's
We're
right.
done with this car.
Well, this is the ultimate don't let the facts get in the way of a good story.
Exactly.
Because it would make for a much better story
if you went to Hardee's and got
if
it.
Cale flips and you don't have a backup, so you go down to the local Hardee's down the
yeah.
street from Daytona.
That's why I told that way.
That's right. Well, that's not the story.
That's not the story.
That's why Hardee's signed on for 2 more years.
Yeah, Lorin's right. That is not the story.
Yeah.
Cale was just plugging his sponsor. I'm going down to the Hardee's to get the car.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
sure you guys have seen the photo of him just starting to flip. I guess all 4 tires are off the ground, but he's looking out the right side.
Oh,
of the
I've
window.
got that picture. I've seen it yesterday. I looked at it.
Was that just an accident, or was he honestly and truly trying to steer out of that?
He was looking some way. He was looking what he's going to hit, I think.
Well, again, it makes for a better story if he was trying to drive out of that.
Well, you can see he's looking to his right.
Yeah. He
Yeah,
was.
you can see his head where it's
Yeah.
turned.
very, very clearly.
Cale had those great years with Junior. There's an old story that goes around in my day that said if a vastly wealthy businessman bought every piece you need to build a top flight car, the best possible car anyone could build, and he put it in a warehouse, and he went to all the drivers and said, any one of you guys can build that car from the ground up, you can have it, you can race it. Tim Richmond, Buddy Baker, and Cale Yarborough would wedge themselves in the door trying to get out.
Yeah, that's right.
I always thought that Cale was successful with Junior for a lot of reasons, but the fact that he didn't interfere with Junior and his bandits was probably one of the best traits he had working with him. Do you agree with that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never seen him do anything. I
Yeah.
never seen him try or attempt to do anything except adjust his belts and put his gloves on. But really, I mean, I never seen
I
him.
didn't either.
Talk about the engine
He
or-
even at home and mood. He didn't want to know nothing about a race car. He just wanted to drive.
He wanted to drive, right? That's
And
why he was
didn't know
building
push
crates.
them loose. Because I remember we was in Michigan, and I can say Lorin was there that day. But anyway, the week before we leave, we had this engineer from Ford Motor Company working for us. And he came to me and said, "Waddell, let me set that race car up this week." I said, "Okay." I said, "I'm in here building engines. I've got a handful anyway." So anyway, he sets the race car up. We go to Michigan. We qualify. And during the race, it's not running very good. And anyway, Bobby Allison come up behind us to lap us, and the caution comes out. And the worst thing Cale ever said to me, he said, "Damn it, Waddell, fix this race car." And Harry Ranier, Lorin's dad, got me by the shirt collar, and he said, "Waddell, fix that race car." And I remember we come in and put a full donut in the right front spring. You never do that, not a full one.
Yep.
But I went to the extreme with it. And then he's at the back of the field because we were working on pit road. So he goes through field and up to the lead he goes.
Yep.
Well, I'm looking, I'm saying, dang, we can't make it on gas, and Bobby can. But then halfway through that run, the caution came out again, and then we was able to adjust it. And then he went out there and won, beat
Won the
Bobby,
race.
won the race,
What year was that?
83.
83.
All right, we won it in '82 too, because that's the day it rained, and it was a rain delay, and he was in MC Anderson's car. I remember it was a long rain delay, and we thought, well, we're gonna be back Monday, and we got it in, and we was in Victor Lane. I got the picture in the dark in Victor Lane, and that's when he won the race, and Darrell got mad and tried to spin him out after the race, and Darrell spun himself out and got in the mud. Cale calls in and says, boys, we might have to fight our way out of here. He's going up the backstretch after he won the race. What's wrong? He said, Darrell's mad. He said, I guess he's mad at me. He done spun out in the mud over here. He said, we might have to fight him.
I thought that was one of the funniest things I ever seen.
I thought, well, if we got to fight him, I'm glad Cale's on our team. Yeah, and then that, let me tell you the rest of the story. So at the time, I was only the stagger guy. So I would drive to Cale's house in Timmonsville, and he had the little grass airport. The race team was in Savannah, so I didn't work full time. I was just a stagger guy on the weekends. I was working at a mechanical contracting place in Royal Hall where we grew up, learning my fabrication skills. And so I'd go to Cale's and fly with him to Michigan and Dover and Pocono, me and him and his pilot. Winnie let the pilot fly it, and Betty Joe. And I would drive to Cale's, fly to the races, fly back to Cale's on Sunday nights, and drive back home and go to work on Monday mornings. Well, this race was delayed, and I remember flying back home, and it was lightning all around us all night. And we landed, and the sun was coming up. Now, Betty Joe wasn't with us at that race. I just remember it was me and Cale and his pilot. So we landed on that little grass airstrip, same one where the lights went out that time, and he held a flashlight in his eyes to land in his mouth to land that airplane. That's how he landed his airplane, with a flashlight in the dark. And we got done, pulled up a plane. He went over and got a little Mazda truck. He's got the Mazda dealership. Pulled over there, and the truck was running, and me and him was standing there, and I thanked the pilot. And when he pulled up, this can of beer was rolling around in the back of his truck. Now, this is 24 hours after we got up to go to the racetrack in Michigan. Won the race, flew all night. He saw that hot beer back there as a Bud Light, and it's expanded where it got so hot. He said, oh, man, there's a beer. 24 hours later, he got that hot beer and popped it and drunk about half. He said, God, that's good. About made me throw up. I said, that right there is a tough man right there. Yeah, and then finally go home and go to bed. I still had 3 hours to drive back home.
That's funny.
Yep.
So 1983 and 84, you win the Daytona 500 on the last lap. Obviously, you couldn't see anything from where you were in the pits. But what was it like watching those last few laps from the pits? Did you know what he was planning, or had that been discussed, or?
Well, you pretty much knowing Cale and, the way he'd been driving race cars, and he knew all about the draft and how to work it. So, and he was a perfectionist at it. And whenever he come out of that backstretch, he lined himself up to pass. And when he come back out of 4, where we could see him, he had a big lead.
Yeah. He never took he always waited till he come off a 2. Always.
Yeah.
He come off a 2, and most of the time, he kept you beside him on the backstretch. Because when you go into 3, the air off this car pushes this other outside car. And then somebody comes with him, and they're racing side by side, and Cale's out here in front, just like 83. Well, if you remember, he was going to pass Donnie Allison, and Donnie run him all the way in the grass.
That's
because
right.
Cale was going to be gone.
Right.
He did the same thing to Baker in 83, and then
Darrell in
Baker got
84.
side by side, and Dale in 84. He always kept you beside him, at that time.
He was definitely the master of the slingshot.
Yeah, you wanted him at Daytona.
Nobody
That's who
better.
you
He had
wanted.
him down pat. He
had
proved
him
it
down.
time and time again.
Yeah.
No doubt.
I remember being on top of the truck at Daytona, clocking cars, and I don't think it was already after we had Rusty Wallace in the 27 car. So old Milwaukee, he was driving for you in the 28 car, and I was over at Blue Max, and we had been through Tim Richmond, and we had Rusty Wallace. And I climbed up on the truck clocking cars, and it was just me and him up there. And remember when he'd get up on the truck, he'd always take his uniform off and sit up there with no shirt on. And he might clock cars, and he was actually clocking cars, sitting up there in a chair. And I just climbed up there clocking cars, and we started talking. He said, "What's the difference in Tim Richmond and Rusty Wallace?" I'll never forget him asking me that. And I said, "Well, Rusty, like you talked about a while ago, if you put this car in there, who could build it from the ground up? Him and Mark Martin and Richard Childress and Dale Earnhardt could all build that car and go out and drive it. Tim Richmond couldn't." And he was more like, he wanted to be a movie star, and he even made comments, I'm just going to drive for a while. Well, when you're a race team, you want somebody that's going, and I told him, I said, Rusty is 110%. He knows all about this car. He knows about shocks and setups. And Cale said, Rusty's got it in his heart, ain't he? I said, yeah, that's it right there. And he said he's got it in his heart, what he wants to do. And that's what how he thought of it. So I'll never forget that.
1979 finish at Daytona. I know that was Junior and the other guys, but you were there, were you not?
We had sat on the pole with Baker.
Yeah.
And the ignition messed up. And they give a green caution to start the race, and we run several laps because the racetrack was wet.
Yeah.
And then when it come to speed, they wouldn't go up speed because the ignition was messed up on the car.
Were you there for the last lap? Did you see it? Okay. So you were gone.
We didn't make a good lap that day, period. That was a sickening day.
All right, so 1984 Firecracker 400 at Daytona. This iconic last few laps with Cale and Richard, and the finish photo, well, the white flag photo, is this great side-by-side shot of Cale and Richard. But then something happens on the white flag lap, and Cale comes in early. Now, whose fault was that? Was that a crew chief call, or was that a driver call?
No, whenever he's headed down pit road, I said, the race is not over. He said, it is for me. That's what he said.
Really?
Yeah, he said, it is for me. Do you remember that?
Yeah, and it's funny. I remember talking to him. Me and Dad were leaving and talking to him, and he said, yeah, I just screwed up. I thought it was over.
Well, I told him, I said, race is not over, Cale. And he said, yeah, it is for me, though.
Yeah.
That's what he come back on me with.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
He didn't say much on the radio, did he?
No, he wasn't me then.
Nothing. He very little words.
I tell you what, Cale Yarborough up compared to all the people that I worked with from the Homo Moody days on. There wasn't no human like him to work with. He didn't want to. He was not going to tell you how to build an engine. He wasn't going to tell you how to set up a race car. He just wanted to drive it.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, he'd tell me, just don't do anything to slow it down. And if you don't want me to use it, don't give it to me. But he was a prince to work with. You knew,
yeah.
And the next thing you knew, he was going to give it everything he had.
Yeah.
He wasn't going to be out there loafing. He's going to be out there going as hard as it'd go.
It's funny you say that. So we were walking into the racetrack, me and my dad, in it's either 83 or 84, and it was actually Michigan. And we ran into Dan Ford, and you know how Dad was. He goes, well, Dan, how are we running? He said, Harry, he's driving it like he ain't got money to go home. That's what he said. He said he's driving it like he ain't got money to get home.
Well, he acted like that his whole life. Cale's tight as a banjo string. You know what I mean? And I commend him for it, but he didn't. He probably didn't come from a whole lot, and then he saved and.
Well, tight as a banjo string. I want to ask Jamie, working for him.
Yeah.
Was he that way? I mean, good or bad?
Oh, he was. We would have bologna and tomato sandwiches in his motel room, and he would tell stories. Mm-hmm. And we all thought that was cool, but I know that was in his budget. That's why he didn't want to take us to Park Seafood or wherever in Daytona. We were going to sit in that room and have sandwiches. And I mean, he would do cookouts before Darlington and fish fries and. I know he didn't have much of a budget for taking us to fancy places, and I got a funny story about that. We were in Sonoma, and we'd just gotten a new crew chief. Ken Glenn came from Roush, And we went to some fancy place. Cale wasn't there. He said, boys, you eat, drink, anything you want. And we followed orders. We ate, and the bill comes, and he turned white, and he says, I can't turn this into Cale. And we didn't have much money. So we had to take about all the money that we had carried for the trip to pony up to pay that bill, because he didn't want to turn that bill into Cale Yarborough.
That's the truth right there.
And, you
talk about his fish fries.
Yeah.
So we played the guitars. Me and my buddy David Petty would go with me, and me and Barry to the races and stuff, and we'd play the guitars in the hotel at night. Well, Cale, staying in the hotel with us, he's like, y'all playing the guitars? Yeah, so we guitar and banjo, and we play and sing. So as a Talladega, he said, we're going to play music tonight. Yeah. So he said, well, get back to the hotel. I'll take you and David. We'll go get us something to eat and come back and play music. And everybody's like, Cale's taking y'all to eat? And we went to a fish place because Cale was a master of getting somebody else to buy, you know. That's how much he loved music. And we'd go eat, went to eat, come back, stopped and got 2 or 3 cases of Bud Light, filled the bathtub up with ice and Bud Light in the hotel room. Ron Bouchard was in the room. Everybody was come by the room, leave the doors open. This is when you motel. You drive your car up to to Talladega. 2 o'clock in the morning, Cale's sitting there drinking them Bud Lights, singing to the top of his head, singing I'll Fly Away. And his favorite song was I Want to Hire a Wino to Decorate My Home. Y'all do that one for me. Y'all do that one. And he loved, I don't know if people know how much he loved old-time music like that and singing. And then he invited me and David to come to the fish fry when we run the Southern 500 and play at his dealership. So we played back there where the lifts and all that were, had fish fry, and he sat there and sang all night and then won the Southern 500 the next day.
And he had cheap entertainment with you, right?
Yeah, it was free. He said, I'll buy y'all the beer, and we got the fish. Y'all come, we'll be there. And then that night we went out after the Southern 500 and went back out to his house, and we played some more. Yep. He loved singing and like that, but nobody knew it. But he's the ringleader. He wanted to be right in the middle. Y'all play this, y'all play that, and he loved the old songs like that. People don't know that about him.
Well, that's another side. As much as we talk, and everybody talked about how he was tight with the dollar, he was very generous. So I can remember 3 or 4 riders and me went to his house one time. He was taking us around the house and showing us everything. And he had this nice bar with a tap on it.
Yeah.
All right, and he poured us all one. And then after that,
you would remember that, wouldn't you?
Oh yeah, because I didn't expect it. But he said, "All right, I done showed you where it is. Help yourself anytime." Well, that didn't sound like the Cale Yarborough that everybody was telling me.
No.
Now I'll tell you another story. Several years later, me and Tom Higgins get invited to his room to watch him in the Dukes of Hazzard. Remember when he was in the Dukes of Hazzard?
Oh yeah.
And so we were sitting there watching it with him, and he had a big old cooler set out there,
Bud
full of
Lights.
beers and ice in it. Yeah, Bud Light.
Yeah.
He said, "Now I done showed you where it is. I don't have to share it anymore." Same thing he said several years ago. He didn't change in that respect when it came to hospitality.
No.
That was a funny story.
He was more like that when you got a Bud Light in him.
Yeah.
If you got a Bud Light in him, he was, But he would have to racetrack. I remember Pocono. We all went back to the hotel, sitting in the bar at the Holiday Inn there, and here he come. He sat right there with you and get a couple beers in him, talking about stories of him and Buddy Baker and things like that. And that's the Cale that a lot of people rarely got to see. You get a couple Bud Lights in him, and he'd like telling stories and singing songs.
He was funny too. I mean,
God, yeah.
I remember one time at Daytona, somebody walked up and said, "Cale, can I get a hat?" Cale said, "The hat man will be here on Thursday." So I was like,
he was at an event with Dale Earnhardt. He told the story about Dale Earnhardt. He said, he'd come in the bar at Daytona, and Dale was in the bar, and he says, "Dale, Junior's out here peeing in the pool." And Dale said, "Well, probably every kid out there is doing that." And Cale said, "Yeah, but they ain't doing it from the high dive."
All right, so speaking of the Southern 500, 1985, all the attention is on Bill. And Waddell, you and Cale, and I guess Lorin too, you try your best to screw up the story.
Well, we had it won, no doubt about it. Until the steering box, the seal blew out of it, and then that was the end of that. And I remember, NASCAR got a hold of me and said, get that car off the racetrack. So we could come down pit road, and I raised the hood. I seen it, what it was then. So caution car was coming, closed the hood, went back on the racetrack. NASCAR got me a hold of me again, trying to get that race car off track, because I seen what had happened. So I told him when he come to me, I said, turn the engine off. And I took my pocket knife and cut the belt off, pulling the power steering belt, so it quit pumping oil and onto the headers, so that's where it was going. But that was a sickening thing. And we had it won and then give it to Bill.
That was a race too that my dad really, really wanted to win. The Southern 500 was like obviously Daytona was big, but to him to win the Southern 500, and we felt like that was the opportunity to do it, and we never won it.
In my racing career, that was one of the worst times of my life that happened.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if you like,
and then give it away.
if all the racers are like this, but if we didn't win or we fell out, I didn't want nobody to win. Are you like that? I didn't want nobody to win. I didn't want Bill to win that $1 million. I wanted Cale to win the race, so Bill wouldn't win the $1 million. You like, well, because you want to win it later. You want your team to win.
It's just like you turn there and just give Bill Elliott $1 million.
Yeah, because he had him covered.
Because of some stupid mechanic that wouldn't listen to what I told him. Grind on the steering box.
You don't grind the steering box.
I was 14 years old, sitting on the back stretch in the box seats with my dad. And now box seats, it was a rail in front of us and chicken wire. And y'all were pitted on the back stretch.
Yeah.
And I was probably the only person there pulling for Bill Elliott. I mean, pulling for Cale Yarborough. I was not, I love Bill Elliott, but I wanted Cale Yarborough to win that Southern 500. And when I saw that you were going into you were going into 3 and 4 at the time, and I thought you blew up. And I was so disappointed, but he came back and finished second. And years later, when I worked for him, I said, Cale, how hard was it to drive that car? He said, boy, I had to turn that car with both arms and both legs.
He told me, it's like driving a train off the track.
Really?
That's what I said. You're the one who was spotting that day. And
that was
my
actually my spotting. I ended up being a cup spotter for 20 years. But that was my spotting debut. Waddell gave me a headset. You told me you gave me a headset. And when you
The
spotted
Southern 500?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, and I literally
a lot of faith in you.
Well, we didn't even have. You didn't go to a spotter stand. I was up.
It was gradual spotters. You had to find your own place to spot.
I went to I went up on a truck. I don't know if it was our truck or wherever, and I remember saying, "It blew up," and Cale said, "It's still running."
Yeah.
And that's when you said
there was a pause there, and then he said, "Well, it's still running.
It's still running."
The gauge is okay.
Yeah, the gauges are okay. Yeah.
Everybody thought it blew up. Everybody on pit road like, man, he blew up.
Yeah.
Bill Elliott should have finished 4th in that race.
Yeah.
Dale went out, Harry went out, Cale went out in front of him. It was like the fates said,
Yeah, it
we're
was
going to give
amazing
it to
the way
him.
that happened that day.
We're going to give it to him.
$1 million bill.
Yeah.
He still won. Cale still won 5 Southern 500s, and we won the last one with him in the MC's car. That was a good one. Beat Richard Petty.
That's true.
Lorin, how old were you spotting?
20. I was 20 years old. And Waddell, I don't know what happened that day. You just handed me the radio and you said, go.
Well, I need somebody spotting. That was you.
Yeah. Well, no, and when you spot for Cale, it was just like, if there's a wreck somewhere or something, it wasn't like I was saying inside, outside, clear. It wasn't like that at all.
That didn't come for years.
For later. But it's like, hey, there's a wreck in turn 1. Watch out. that type of thing. That's all I remember about
You done a good job.
Well, I ended up doing it for 20 years. So and it's funny. That was my spotting debut.
Yeah.
Was that race?
Back when we had steel bumpers, it wasn't no inside outside.
No.
They drove around past when you put this package on the car, put the bumper on the ground, no bumpers on the cars. That's when everybody's running in packs everywhere.
That's
so
right.
back in them days, I think we was the first ones. We put 3 or 4 guys or 3 guys around the road course.
Right.
Send them out in the car to go over at Sonoma and spot over here and there.
Riverside.
Yeah,
on Riverside.
yeah.
'Cause you can see them come by and go out of sight, and then you'd be a minute or two before they come back around.
Yeah,
I hated road courses.
I liked them. We won them.
I like Daytona and Talladega.
Yeah, you did.
You sure did.
When Cale left MC Anderson, he was offered a lot of money to do a full season, and MC really wanted to go after that championship.
Yeah.
Yep.
But Cale said, "No, I'm just going to do a part-time deal and spend more time with my family."
And that's why he went to MCs to race part-time.
Yeah.
Because in 82, we run 16 races and won 4.
Yeah.
You know, so he wasn't going back to full-time.
How important was it for him to spend time with his family?
It was very important. I remember him telling about his daughter's bicycle's tires was flat, and he said, "I thought why ain't you riding your bike?" And she said, "Daddy, my tires is flat, and you said you was gonna fix them." And he said, "That's when it triggered him to, man, my kids are growing up, and I'm always gone. I've got a 4,000-acre farm and plenty of money. Why am I doing this full time?" And I think it meant a lot. Well, there you go. We won 16 races, and MC thought we could go out and win a championship. And he said, "I've won championships. I've got a family I want to be with." So I think it was a big priority of his. You know, and I commend him for doing it. Huh?
He was definitely a family man,
Definitely.
which was good.
Yep. And he was afraid of Betty Joe. He would tell you, he said,
wasn't?
"What are you afraid of?" He said, "I'm afraid of Betty Joe." He wasn't afraid of snakes. He wasn't afraid of alligators. He wasn't afraid of crashing a plane. And like I say, I remember flying, and with him, if there was a cloud, well, let's go over and fly through that cloud. That's what Cale. Everybody else flew around him. Cale flew straight. And when he'd get in these bad clouds, and there's a little old 6-seater, Piper, that plane was all of this, and Betty Joe would slap him in the back of the head, and she called him Daddy. "Daddy, get us out of this," because I was sitting back here with Betty Joe. "Daddy, get us out of this." Slap him in the head. I'm like, "Yeah, Daddy, get us out of this. I don't like this either. I'm looking for the throw-up bag."
I've got a Betty Joe story.
They were tight now. You talk about two that were meant for each other, him and Betty Joe.
Oh, yeah.
They sure were. But we ran the first Brickyard 400 in '94, and we were, they got the grandstands behind the pits. And after a pit stop, we would throw the lug nuts into they were just clamoring for them. The fans, they wanted a lug nut. And I zinged one, and I hit Betty Joe in the side of the head.
Oh, hello.
She was sitting on the pit box. I mean, I didn't throw it real hard, but it hit her in the head, and I thought, "Oh, man, I'm done here at Cale Yarborough Motorsports." So after the race, she was talking to me, and she said, "Daddy, he hit me in the side of the head with a lug nut." And I said, "I'm so sorry, Betty Joe." He goes, "Oh, she got a hard head. She put up with me all these years." But he laughed about it, and we had a good time.
I never remember him using any vulgarity or vulgar language. I never remember him saying, he never worried about what everybody else was doing. He didn't even worry about his car. He just like, "I'll get in." He'd walk up and get in it. He didn't say, "What have we done?" Rusty Wallace and Mark Martin and Darrell Waltrip, you had to have a 2-hour session with them before they get in the car. And then a 2-hour session when they get out. What can we do? What are they doing? Not Cale. Cale got in that car and drove it and got out and didn't say nothing.
You never work with a driver till you work with him.
Never. That's
He was
right.
Nobody even
They broke the
second
mold.
place to him.
That's right.
He was amazing.
He was amazing.
How hard was it for him to ultimately give up driving?
I think he hurt a lot. I think his neck was hurt a lot.
Yeah,
So he had a
that
lot of
wreck
aches
he
and
had at
pains.
Rockingham, that really set him back. And like I said earlier, he told me when I went in there to see him in the Cure Center, he said that was the hardest he had ever hit. And he never really got over the limping after that. That hurt him bad. And then he had that wreck at Texas when down into turn 1 and the thing turned right, blew a tire and hit the ball head on.
He's had some
that
bad
did
ones.
kill him.
Yeah, I think it was a lot of that too.
Yeah.
But he didn't complain.
He told me one time that he didn't sleep more than 10 minutes at a time because he would have pain in his shoulders and his legs and lost a lot of feeling in his legs, but never heard him complain. And he always, when he showed up, he had those cowboy boots and that 1976 Winston Cup championship belt buckle and belt on, and never had a hair out of place. And I was told a story that when he had to get reading glasses, he thought that was the end of the world because people would see that he was vulnerable. And he wasn't that superhero. He was just like everybody else. But yeah, he took some hard licks, but he never had a relief driver.
What was Cale's attitude when he finally had to close his team?
Well, I mean, that year was, 99 was a pretty bad year because he'd sold the team about twice, and guys couldn't wind up paying for it. And I remember Daytona 500, this new guy, Wayne Burdett, had came in, and they said Cale wasn't coming. So I left his chair on the hauler. We had a big captain's chair for him that would sit on a pit box. That was before the mega boxes. And a guy come up to me and said, "Where's Cale's chair?" I said, "It's in the hauler." "Well, you gonna get it?" I said, "No, Cale's not coming." And he said, "Well, this is your new Cale." I said, "No, that's not Cale Yarborough." So, but I think with sponsorship trouble, and Cale didn't want to spend his own money to race, and who does? So it was pretty difficult for him, and I saw him years later, and he told me, he says, I think about you guys all the time and how you tried to keep this team together, and everybody did their part. And I mean, I had chances to go other places, at bigger places, but man, that was a legend. That was Cale Yarborough. That was my boyhood hero, and who gets to say that? And so I stayed until he closed the doors, and it was a pretty sad day. And we only won one race while during the time he started Cale Yarborough Motorsports till he ended. But I'm very proud that we were a part of bringing him that win. And when we did win in '97 at Daytona in the 400, we really didn't celebrate. I mean, we jumped around and went to victory lane, but Jimmy Cox is back there pulling on the spoiler going, "Let's go to Tech, boys." And Cale stops him and says, "Where you got to be? The beach?" And but it wasn't long till we had to go through Tech and deal with that. And Cale and Tony Furr and John Andretti actually sprayed the champagne to the fans through the fence because we were gone. And we just figured, well, hey, we broke the ice, and this is going to start something, and we're going to go to victory lane a lot with Cale Yarborough. And that just didn't happen.
What does it mean to you personally to know that you were a part of Cale Yarborough's final win?
Well, I mean, it means a whole lot to me now. I always wanted to win the Daytona 500, and we had a really good shot in '97. But John had a flat tire during the race. He thought he broke an axle. So he turns and goes in the garage, and spotter says, "You got a flat right rear tire." And most of the crew was back in the garage, and there was only about 4 of us on pit road, and we changed that tire. And I think he finished a couple laps down, and really would have liked to have given him the Daytona 500, and I was like, well, this is the 400. We won the 400, but it means a lot more to me now that we were with John Andretti's first win, and it was Cale Yarborough Motorsports, or Cale Yarborough's last win. It means a ton to me now.
Well, listen, we could sit here and talk about Cale for hours and hours, but just to tie things up, how would each of you like for Cale to be remembered?
I will say he's the toughest race car driver I ever got the privilege to work for or watch. I mean, David Pearson was tough, Richard Petty was tough, but this guy went to another level. And I also think I want to go back to how I thought he was laser focused. He didn't worry about anything around him. He worried about what he had to do. He supported his race team and never complained. Now that's something right there, a driver that, he didn't complain. He got in there and did his job, and he took care of his family. And he liked to sing some music.
I was very fortunate about 2 months ago. I was down at the South Carolina 400 at Florence Motor Speedway, and I'm friends with two of Cale's daughters, and I sent his middle daughter, Kelly, a text. And I said, hey, I'm in Florence. And she said, hey, why don't you come over tomorrow at 3 o'clock? So this was really about 2 months ago. It was 1st of November. So I got to spend about an hour and a half with Cale. And he was great. I mean, he was sitting in a chair in a kind of a lazy boy, had his feet up, and we sat there and talked. And a really funny story he told me was, and so Cale was a football player, and he was actually at Clemson. He went to Clemson, and something happened to where he told me the story. He went home, and he didn't go back.
He went for a race.
That's right. He went for a race.
There was a race, and he told the coach that I got to go run this race, and I'll be back.
That's right. Well, he didn't come back.
When the coach told him to pack your bags, if you go to that race, don't come back.
That's right.
And then the coach ends up calling Cale and saying, hey, come on back. And Cale said, you told me not to come back.
Right.
I said, I'm making a racing for a living, and that coach used to come to the races.
He did, and that's funny. So Cale told me that story 2 months ago, and he goes, yeah. He said it was one of the. I think it was he came to a Talladega race,
and Cale won.
And Cale won it. It was, which is either 84 or 85, driving for the 28. And he said that old coach said, well, I guess I'd have to admit, I was probably wrong about that.
He said, I ain't never wrong, but I'm going to tell you right now, I was wrong about you, Cale.
I was wrong about that.
Cale said, I'm going to drive for a living. I ain't going to play football for a living.
That's exactly right. So I thought that was a pretty good story. And literally that story was, Cale told me that story 2 months ago.
Yeah.
And
awesome.
I was very fortunate to get to spend that time with him, this close to him passing away.
Yes, you were.
So that's how I'm going to remember him.
All right.
Well, I'd like to tell this story, and this kind of sums up who Cale was to me. In 1997, we sat on the pole at Talladega, and it poured down rain, and there's no stopping this rain. And Cale was like, I am ready to go. And my dad said, well, I'm ready to go too. He says, Cale said, will you give me a ride to the airport? I said, yeah. So my dad and Jim Hunter, who was president of Darlington at the time, and Cale's pilot. So they drive out of the garage, and it was dead stop, traffic everywhere. Cale said, hold on a minute. He took an unopened umbrella and got out, and he started pointing that umbrella at cars. And he said they all stopped because they saw, man, that's Cale Yarborough. And he would wave my dad through with that umbrella, and they'd move up until finally they got out of there. My dad looked at Cale and he said, man, it sure is good to be well liked and well known. And Jim Hunter was in the back seat, said, yeah, if that'd been me with that umbrella, they'd have took it from me and stuck it up my ass.
At Talladega.
At Talladega, but he commanded he had this presence about him. And he was like the commander when he showed up.
He knew how to use his strengths.
Oh, yeah. And he was, you never told him no, but he never asked you to do anything that he wouldn't do himself. Right. But, him pointing that umbrella, and that's how he ran his ship. I know we didn't have a whole lot of success, but it's not for lack of trying from Cale Yarborough, because he did everything he could to keep us going. And he was a sponsor's dream. That's where this whole, Lorin and I have argued with people on the internet forever about this show car from Hardee's winning the race. And then we have to type the same thing every time that it wasn't a show car. And, but Cale was like, hey, I guess we got to go down to the Hardee's and get us a show car.
Well, he didn't know one car from the other.
Right.
Waddell can tell you that. No. He didn't know one car from the other.
Right.
He just wanted to get in.
He just right. Yeah. He knew where that steering wheel and that throttle was. He did know where that was.
And he would give you 10 extra horsepower, just him behind the wheel.
Oh, yeah.
No doubt about that.
I remember him getting in the race car. Which car am I in today?
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's how much he cares.
I'll never forget watching him at Bristol. It's like swatting flies. That's how he'd drive a race car, just like swatting flies. Everybody else, Cale was driving that car, man.
Mm-hmm.
Well, can I tell this story?
Oh.
Chris Carrier, my crew chief at the 75 truck, he asked Cale one day, he said, 1976, he said, I was 16 years old on the backstretch, and you were lapping Dick Brooks for the 7th time with about 10 laps to go. He said Brooks was all laid over in the seat, and he said back then you could look in the windshield and see the driver. He said, and Cale was just sawing on that wheel. And he asked Cale, he says, didn't somebody not tell you that you were, you're 7 laps ahead and there's less than 10 laps to go? He said, it didn't matter. And that was Cale Yarborough. Yeah. It didn't matter. He was going to the front and he was going to stay there.
I remember him saying one time to my dad that it was easier to drive the car 100% than try to drive it 90%.
Yeah, don't hold back.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Like his rhythm he'd be more in rhythm with the car driving it hard than driving it easy. I remember him saying that. I remember at Charlotte one time really like driving the car in a corner so deep, and y'all were struggling with something, and Dad said, Cale, you can't run wide open. And he looked at my dad and he said, I might. So he goes, I might. So, well, it was 100% of the time with him.